The fact of the matter is the extraterrestrial presence has been saving our bacon for about 80 years, preventing nuclear war and even space objects from striking the Earth. But we have a group of people who have technologies that are targeting those ET objects who are imperiling the whole planet.
One of the world's foremost authorities on the subject of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and exotic technologies.
Dr. Stephen Greer.
Now, this is something I don't talk about much, but I can tell you that these extraterrestrial civilizations, plural, there are dozens of them. None of them are hostile, but boy, are they concerned about our hostility.
Founder of the Disclosure Project, Stephen focuses on revealing classified information about UFOs and extraterrestrial life.
They have the ability to pretty much wipe out 4 to 6 billion people, and I think that's their intention, and I think that's not far off. A voice broke in from the satellite and said, Dr. Greer, change the direction of this conversation now. We're going to dump this show live. I'm going to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but that gets you banned.
Do you think there was an ancient civilization that also mastered it, arguably built the pyramids?
Well, you know.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to First Things First. We have a special guest today, Dr. Stephen Greer. Thank you very much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me on. Been looking forward to this interview. Yeah.
It's 10 p.m. in Dubai. It's quite late, but these are exactly the type of conversations which I like to have late at night. So I think, first of all, I'm happy to see that you are still alive and doing well.
Yeah. Yes. Well, after the last year, that's something of a miracle in and of itself. But I am. I was severely injured last October, but I'm back doing everything and hiking in the Alps last month, and back in the gym doing my full weights and like pressing 700, which for an old guy is all right. So
that's pretty good.
I like working out. I work out about 6 to 8 hours a week.
That's good stuff. Do you find that with obviously the reach that you've had on some of the podcasts you've been on with Patrick Beck-David and some of the other ones, has there been a lot more people getting in touch with you and reaching out to you?
Well, it's always been like that in the last few years. I mean, certainly since the original Disclosure Project in 2001, when we launched this whole effort, it's sort of been a steady thing. Now, I think what's actually accelerated in the last 2 years are the number of military defectors coming forward who are fed up, quote unquote, their words, not mine, with the secrecy, and are coming forward as both whistleblowers, but also as operatives. So there's a whole team of senior military guys who are special forces mainly, working in a SAP, a special access project, who are preparing to, move forward on all these illegal projects and get them corrected. So we're hoping that follows through. I mean, the sideshow is the United States Congress and White House. The real action is happening with those kind of people who have the courage to correct this problem, which is a massive constitutional crisis, as well as a security risk to the whole world. If most people don't want to know how dangerous this whole issue is, and I get cut off a lot, even by people in the Congress. They said we don't want to hear any more about that. But the fact of the matter is, the extraterrestrial presence has been saving our bacon for about 80 years, preventing nuclear war and even space objects from striking the Earth. But we have a group of people who have technologies that are targeting those objects, the ET objects, who are imperiling the whole planet. So it's a very complicated, nuanced problem, and it's the opposite of how it's portrayed in the media and in the corporate media and in the internet search algorithms from Google and elsewhere. So I think it's a very big issue. And the people who are on the inside, let's just say the people who are operational now today in these black projects that are being run illegally, but these are guys who got pulled in, maybe they were 18, 20, Green Berets, Special Forces, Delta Force guys. They now realize that they're in a system that is completely corrupt, and they're wanting to have themselves liberated from it. I had a very poignant story last year. I was being driven around in the Southern California area in an armored vehicle. It looked like a Denali, but it's armored. And, the guy who dropped me off at my place, he was in that system, and he said, "Thank you for what you're doing for those of us stuck on the other side." And he was referring to he and all the brothers who were in these programs, who some of them been there 30 years now, right? 25, 30 years. And they know now that it's a completely dangerous and corrupt, illegal operation, but they're in it. So, how do you how do you build a bridge to liberate these guys? And with it, the technologies that would save the biosphere. Right? So that's, although I want to talk about this in the Middle East, but we haven't needed oil for decades. So, all that's going to go the way of all flesh. It's a huge change coming, and it's got to come very quickly now, given the state of the world.
With the people that have come forward, these ex-military personnel, what I've never really understood is how they can say certain things, but then when asked and pressed to elaborate further, they say, oh, I can't talk about that specifically. Like, why is it that they can talk about certain things, but then there's other things that they can't talk about?
Well, I can't speak to the ones that I'd have to know about whom you're speaking. Okay. The people who say that, if you look at the hearings last year in Congress that were just these brief events, people like Mr. Brush and others, they don't understand that they can talk about anything related to this subject because the subject has been declared an unconstitutional operation. A priori, there are no non-disclosure agreements or national security oaths that pertain to it. That's the legal foundation of the whole disclosure project, which I actually started in 1993 when I was asked to brief the director of the CIA. It was called Operation Starlight at that time, and it was private. I'm a trauma doctor, and I was flown up from North Carolina to brief Mr. Clinton's CIA director, and within a few months of him being elected or sworn in. And so, what we decided was once we could absolutely prove that the key people in our government here, as well as United Kingdom and some other countries, Canada, were being lied to or denied access or even threatened for looking into it. At that point, we and our constitutional team of lawyers said these are illegal projects. A priori, you can't enforce the National Security Act on it because you can't enforce the law around an operation that's by definition illegal, not being overseen properly by either the president or the Congress. So at that point, we have told every witness of ours, now the whistleblowers I have understand this, that they can talk about anything. What they filter on, and this is an important distinction, is information that isn't related specifically to this issue that may be associated, that is still top secret, and that would be covered under a non-disclosure agreement. So this gets in the devil's in the details, as always, which people find boring, but I think it's important for people to understand this. The other part of it is that fear. So some people, even on my team, they will talk about a certain amount of information, and then they'll self-censor, not because they can't talk about it, but because they're sort of programmed not to, and they're afraid of consequences for them or their family. So in terms of retribution, the other self-censoring thing, and I'm dealing with this a lot with Congress, the senior folks who are like right hand to the Senate Intelligence Committee and people like that, they can only tell their bosses, meaning the chair and co-chairs of these kind of committees, so much before they kind of lose them. One of the problems is it's a little bit like, what is that movie, A Few Good Men, when Jack Nicholson, he's asked, Tom Cruise says, I just want to know the truth. He goes, you can't handle the truth, and goes screams at him like that. It's a little bit like that because, if you tell some of these guys who are just, they're basically, still have training wheels on learning about this issue, and these are senior members of the United States Senate and House, you tell them too much, they just shut down or they become afraid. So, we have to be understanding the human limitations of understanding this. And part of my job is to keep pushing that envelope without breaking it. It's hard because I'm holding information and intelligence on this that goes back 34 years now that I've been gathering, 762 whistleblowers that I've debriefed with all their information. So how much do you say to whom? And I know that this sort of self-censoring happens with these witnesses. Like, I know that Mr. Brush was asked about, have people been killed? Because congressman that asked that question, I had previously briefed and assured him I know people who have been. And Gresh says, well, I can't talk about that. We have to be in a SCIF, which is a secure compartmented information facility where top secret information. That's not true. He could have talked about it, and he should have. But he's getting some very bad advice by some attorneys right now, but and who don't understand the bigger picture. I mean, you really have to go back and unpack this for a long time. But you also have to have what I call inverse witnesses. Inverse witnesses are the ones who should know about this, who don't. They're more important than the ones who know about it, because that's how you prove the operation's illegal. I mean, if you're the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency or CIA or the president or chairs of these key committees, and you're not told anything or you're threatened when you inquire, that is proof that the operation is illegal. And that then liberates everyone who wants to talk about this. But you have to have that. You have to have that fund of knowledge and the proof. And I have it in my archive. Here are the meetings that were had. This person was denied access. Everyone in the world now knows that Admiral Wilson, who is head of Intelligence Joint Staff, we briefed at the Pentagon, and then he was threatened and was shut down, notwithstanding his high position to be the main source of intelligence for the whole Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? I mean, and he was told, you don't have a need to know. And this is the guy in charge of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So when you can prove this, then you make this conclusion. If you don't know what I just said, you're still wondering, what the landscape is here. So I think for that reason, a lot of those whistleblowers censor themselves because they are still drinking the false narrative and the Kool-Aid of their training under national security provisions and what are called OPSECs, Operation Security. Here's what you can say, here's what you can't. But you have to understand this deeper context to be able to then realize what you can and cannot say.
When do you think this
complicated an answer? If so, I apologize, but it's
no,
important.
this is all good stuff. When did you think this all started? When did it begin?
Well, I mean, I think the secrecy on this probably goes back to the early 20th century. It's funny when Mr. Trump was president, I put in his briefing document, the very first image was a dissection of ET on a slab with some intel and military people there with some doctors from 1922 to 28 is when it's been dated. And we got this from a very interesting series of events. So I believe that there has been some degree of classification on this going back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. But the big action started, obviously, once we detonated the first atomic bomb and the ETs realized that we were an existential threat to life on Earth as well as potentially to them. That's when the modern era started. The whole thing went off the rails in terms of supervision in about 1956 to 60, when Eisenhower was shoved aside. So President Eisenhower, the reason he gave that famous speech when he left office, in large part was this issue, although he didn't acknowledge it. He said, beware the military-industrial complex. And a lot of people were going, well, this is a two-term Republican president who had 5 stars back then, and a World War II hero. Why would he be saying this about the military-industrial complex when his whole career has been military, right? Is because he saw the power that the corporate end of this, let's call it the fascistic corporate moneyed interest, did to take over the interests of the people and the United States government, where he was being pushed aside and he was being denied access. And if you don't take my word for this, we have a witness who was an Army communications specialist, or Army Signal Corps used to be called in the White House, who knew Eisenhower. And Eisenhower directly told him this is what had happened to him. And this was in 59 and 60. So we know that somewhere between the mid 50s and 60, Eisenhower lost control of these programs. They went deep black, illegal, and they have never been under proper supervision since. So you can track it. I've been able to track it all the way back almost, 65 to 70 years.
This was roundabout when they were testing atomic bombs, and
right
around about the same time, this was when there was UFOs crash landing in Roswell. Now, this is one thing which I was always curious about.
Excuse me, just a correction here. Yeah. You don't go through interstellar space and can't navigate an electrical storm in Roswell, New Mexico. My friends that are pilots can navigate an electrical storm in New Mexico in a F-18 or Airbus 321. They were downed. These objects were downed. They were ET craft that were struck with a type of electromagnetic weapon, early one in the mid to late 40s, and they were developed based on the work that Tesla had done on scalar electromagnetic systems and what they learned about EMPs, electromagnetic pulses that go out when you detonate an atomic bomb. Those got weaponized. The early ones were not very accurate, but they were good enough to hit the ones that downed in New Mexico in the 40s. They've since become extraordinarily advanced. I mean, we're talking dozens of generations of refinement, so much so they can be portable the size of this computer and be put on a vehicle and strike an object at a distance. So they're illegal. I mean, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty clearly forbids electromagnetic pulse weapons because of how dangerous they are, and they're a component of the nuclear blast. But it's basically you're taking out, without the nuclear blast, you're taking out that EMP aspect and then weaponizing it. That's what's happened. And that's how they're targeting the ET craft and downing them. So they don't just accidentally crash. Now, I don't know of any that have been crashed because of a malfunction. I think they've come down because we're targeting them. And I think at this point, it's well over 1,000 of them, probably 2,000.
And you believe the reason behind us targeting them was to investigate and try and reverse engineer the technology they have?
Well, I think there are two big reasons. One, I had a naval intelligence guy approach me once back in the probably mid 90s, and I was given some presentation. He pulled me aside and he says he had been present when we used those weapons and targeted these objects. And by the way, our archive that we released has 122 of these downed cases, many of them with direct witness testimony. And that's an archive for anyone who's listening to see. It's at the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, dpiarchive.com. But what I learned from this was that they not only wanted to get the technology and reverse engineer and study it, they didn't want the ETs to be known too much by the public until they could control it and control the narrative attached to it. And then thirdly, the ETs explicitly wanted us to disarm and stop using those weapons because their guidance systems and their propulsion systems, their physics, are disrupted when an EMP goes out that has a scalar component. Now, what most people don't know, and we have a GE physicist on our team, I think he has 6 PhDs, and his specialty is this area. And he works for General Electric. And he knows that when you have an EMP embedded in it, it's called a scalar signal, which goes faster than the speed of light, right? It's because of scalar signal. A normal electromagnetic wave or pulse is still a waveform like this, right? Propagating through the vacuum at 186,000 miles per second. A scalar is, they call it longitudinal sometimes. It's a point, the energy that goes out in a straight line. And there you have a problem because now you're going beyond the speed of light and you're crossing into the area of communications and physics dealing with extraterrestrial vehicles systems. And that's another reason. So they wanted us to stop using those weapons. Our military guys say, like the hell we are. We're going to be in a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. And so it's gone. All right. So now we have 70, 80 years of this madness. So that was the other issue, is that the ETs absolutely wanted us to stop using those. And if you look at the case files we have, there is a preponderance of these ET objects surveilling and going over all our nuclear facilities, not just nuclear bombs, but nuclear processing facilities, even nuclear energy facilities, because they know how dangerous it is. And they know that whole civilizations have vanished on other planets, frankly, because of these. And so that is a prevailing interest on their part. So again, I know you're going to ask a question. I'm going to kind of unpack it a little more complicated, but because there's a very deep story here, but there's also a deep science behind it. So why were they obviously these civilizations, in my opinion, have been observing this planet for millennia. Why was this huge modern era opened up where there have been so many millions of sightings and events? It's because of our development of these weapons of mass destruction, where we're now a threat to all life on Earth, but potentially going out into space. And this is the other problem. The 50s coincided with our early development of our space program. Sputnik was in 57 when the Soviets, then we had the Apollo mission that my uncle worked on. My uncle helped design the lunar module that landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong. So what you realize is that put these two things together and look through the eyes of the ETs. We're a bunch of rampaging monkeys blowing each other up, right? We've had all these world wars. The fighting goes on to this day. Now we have weapons that can destroy a whole world, but now we're trying to go out into space where we could be a threat to them, right? And their planets. Because remember, if you're dealing with something beyond the speed of light and you develop it well enough, you could target a distant planet out of our solar system and potentially strike it without going there with these kind of weapons. Now, this is something I don't talk about much, but I can tell you that these extraterrestrial civilizations, plural, there are dozens of them, none of them are hostile, but boy, are they concerned about our hostility, because here's the problem. Our technology has exceeded our social and spiritual development. I mean, that's a problem. This is how a civilization goes poof, because we're still very primitive socially. We're still killing each other. Our civilization is built on greed and avarice and control and domination and destruction and war, most of it. And until we get over that hump, which is the biggest challenge, I think, is a social and spiritual crisis, not religious, spiritual, which I make a distinction on that. I think there's an inverse relationship usually between religiosity and spirituality. Usually the more religiously fanatical someone is, the less spiritual they are, but mostly. But yeah. Some social commentary there that'll get me some enemies. But I just think that who cares? But I think that this is the truth: is that these civilizations from other star systems are observing this, but they're sort of appalled. And the longer these sort of covert programs develop these technologies, the other problem I find with this whole subject is everyone's always fighting the last war, as they say. They're looking in the rearview mirror. And they don't look at right now or looking forward, because right now is not 1947. Right now is not 1977. I mean, the technological curve, when you have trillions of dollars, and I'm not kidding, trillions of dollars that have gone into covert engineering and research and development at my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, Raytheon, E-Systems, EG&G, all these big SAIC, Booz Allen Hamilton. What happens is that in those compartmented super secret operations, they recruit the smartest, most amazing physicists and engineers and brains possible. And they're paid well, and they're protected. And your brilliant people are not at Harvard and MIT. I tell people they're in these programs because they're picked out of high school or early in college and they're pulled in. And with that kind of brain power, and you have in your possession the materiel, the extraterrestrial vehicles and devices and systems, they're going to be big breakthroughs. And now we have 80 years almost of that kind of big breakthrough research and development. And it doesn't stand still. Anyone who knows technological developments, look at our own internet and things. It starts out kind of like this, and then it goes nonlinear. It goes boom, right? So that's the problem. But it's a development technologically with no one minding the store from the people or never mind the press, which is utterly corrupt, or the government. And mainly it's because the people in the United States government, 99.9 whatever percent, don't know anything about this. And that's on purpose. So everyone thinks, everyone asks me, why is the government hiding this? I said, which government? Whose government? The government that we elect and appoint? They don't know anything for the most part. A few do. And those are corrupt interests that we know who they are, and they're being handed over to a law enforcement team, frankly, even as we speak this week. So we're about ready to.
If it's not the government, then it's what, like some sort of mafia organization
Well, it's a hybrid of covert illegal government interest operations and corporate. So think of a hybridized entity. But I think the center of power is clearly not in the constitutional elected officials and appointed officials. I think if you were to have a frank conversation with any president, they won't admit this. No one wants to admit they're the emperor that has no clothes, right? But if you were to have a frank conversation, they go, same thing with these senior senators and members of Congress I've met with. They should know, they don't know, and they're not lying. They're not covering it up. Now, there are a few members of the Congress who are read into this and who are problematic, and who, for example, were instrumental in killing the Senate bill last year that came out that would have given amnesty and protection to whistleblowers coming forward. And that was all neutralized by the House reconciliation between the Senate. And we know who those devils were who killed that. And we run them through the system, and we know who's paying for them, where they're getting their money, and who has them in their pocket. So the fact that they are colluding with a corrupt enterprise and committing treason against the United States government means that they could be tried for treason. And I'm saying this bluntly. So this is serious stuff. And, I think the people who now come forward beyond the whistleblowers and the defectors are the people who are in the government with enough authority to do something about this, who are now authorizing extending immunity to people. And this is outside the Congress. This is people in, I can't say what agencies or whatever, but who now realize that there's an enormous problem that's an existential threat to the world. And so they're devoted to getting this resolved. And these are people who, they're not afraid of taking a bullet. I mean, these are guys who've been on frontline special forces, guys, and I know them very well, and they're serious. And that's why I'm very encouraged. I know it sounds scary to the public, maybe listening, but I'm actually very encouraged that there's a band of guys and operational programs that are legal, that are operating to get all of this under control as soon as they can. It's complicated. Part of it is the David and Goliath problem, right? I mean, you're the head of, I don't say where, you're special operations wherever, and you have jets, and you have helicopters, and you have guns, and you have tanks, and you have whatever. Right? The people who you're needing to put in check have technologies that are thousands of years more advanced based on studying extraterrestrial vehicles. And so they have portable EMP and scalar weapons that can make your helicopters and jets fall right out of the sky, or freeze your entire group of armed vehicles. So I'm trying to advise them on how you work around that. And the best way to work around that, and this is why I'm on your show, and let's see how far we can take this virally, is that people who are operational in these bases and in these programs, most of the guys who are their OPSEC guys, right? They're security people. They're younger guys. They've been pulled in and cleared. They do, yes, sir. They do as they're told, and they don't know they're in a criminal operation. So one of the things I've been asked to do by these guys who are trying to move forward is because they can't be identified publicly. I'm already out in the public, so I'm exposed. Is to say to guys, and let it get back channeled to anyone watching your show or Patrick, David, or whoever's, Sean Ryan's show, whoever it is, that here's what we're going to do if law enforcement and a legally constituted entity shows up at your facility, put your weapon down. And if you don't, you're colluding with an illegal treasonous operation, and you could therefore be arrested, but also prosecuted for treason. So that message we're being very clear about, so that what we're hoping happens when this group stands up and rolls or moves, that there won't be any resistance. It'd be like the Orange Revolutions in Eastern Europe and stuff, where, it just happened without any kinetic, violent sequela or outcomes. So that's what we're aiming for, is a peaceful transfer of these operations back under constitutional control, and then a careful release of select technologies, particularly energy generation technologies, that would completely save the biosphere, and in 20 years, would end all poverty on the planet. I mean, we have these technologies. The former chairman of a Fortune 50 corporation, who is trying to defect, but he's had his whole family threatened, told us that
what's the progress on that since you last spoke about it? Has there been any further progress and developments on that?
No, because he's waiting to see which sacrificial lambs get taken out. He doesn't want to be that one, right? He's waiting to see if the security programs that are being put in place are adequate. So I'm sort of the canary in the mine shaft. There are some other canaries in the mine shaft. Look, I mean, it's all about what risk you're willing to take. And I can tell you, this man was approached right after he reached out to us, and was told they will kill you and all your grandchildren and children, very bluntly. And by the way, there's a head of state in Europe I've learned about recently had the same thing happen. So this is serious stuff. And, the question is how much those guys trust that the protective capabilities of this special access project is really able to protect them, right? And their whole extended family. And this is a complicated problem because you're dealing with thugs. I've been dealing with these thugs since the early 90s, but we understand how they operate and what their mindset is. And when I say thugs, it's funny, when I first, about 3 years ago, the senior guy, Senate Intelligence Committee, who was tasked with looking into this on behalf of the chair and co-chair of the committee, when I met with him the first time in the skiff for the Senate, he said to me, well, why don't people just come forward? And I explained about this thuggery. And he said, really? I said, oh, yeah. And then we leave the skiff. He goes out to his home in suburban Virginia, and they deploy 2 unmarked helicopters over his house, staring down at him with his 4 children in the house with the whole house shaking. And he says, wow, these are thugs. I said, yes, sir. I told you they're thugs. So that is a true story. So, I mean, imagine this is a guy who knows nothing, who's just trying to inquire about this on behalf of one of the key oversight committees in the whole United States government. And this happens to him right away. And to this day, he continues to be harassed. So in all kinds of ways, there are all kinds of ways you can harass people legally, false investigations. Suddenly there's an IRS audit, right? People who think that these agencies don't have people in them that will abuse their authority and power, are, delusional. It happens all the time. It's not political per se. It's who has an agenda and who can pull those strings, right? Who has those guys as their puppets. And that's what happens. So, I've had those games run on me since the early 90s. And it takes some kind of, determination and courage to move forward. And luckily, that guy I'm referring to, who I cannot name, he had been a special operator, military, and then became the senior guy for Senate Intel. So when I met with him, he'd be the equivalent of a 3-star general if he'd stayed military. And so he'd seen action, and he'd gone mano a mano in bad situations in the Middle East, Africa. And so, he was not he wasn't some, penny loafer wearing lawyer from Yale. He was, no offense to penny loafer wearing lawyers from Yale, but be careful. I have a daughter who's Stanford Law School, but the thing is that that's really what it boils down to. I'll be honest with you, is, you have to have the information and knowledge about this, but you also then have to have the integrity not to be corrupted, but you have to have the courage to act. If you don't have the courage to act, the rest of it doesn't matter. Right. And that's
what you're trying to do is create this safe space and protection for these whistleblowers and people who have something to say.
Right. And we have that. We that is actually in place now. But it's new. It just got stood up this summer. And we're going to have to see how uh, how much confidence these guys have. Now, I think that's a separate category of people. These sort of whistleblowers are separate from the ones that are in the system that are operational. We're talking senior people in the system, operational at covert bases, right? And underground bases and things like this. And those guys have the ability to defect and bring with them the material and the hard drives, and not just information, but the hard stuff. And that's moving rather quickly. Now, that is even more dangerous, obviously, but those guys are in the system and know where the weak spots are. So, they're on our side of this, and it's very encouraging. It's very spooky, frankly, what I'm doing, because I'm the liaison between people in the U.S. government, these law enforcement special access project guys that are part of the legal government. Let's call it Team Blue. Some people call it Team Blue. And then these illegal black project guys who also are currently operational. They're not former people. They're in the system. Those guys may break the leash and run before the others, even get out the gate, get set up. So we don't know how this is going to play. I can't predict it. These are, this is, what I'm telling you is state of the art of right now, and it's evolving. The reason I speak of it without being too specific is that I have to. I hold my own clearances in the sense that I can tell anybody anything I want, but these people trust me to be discreet about their names and where they're located and how they're going to operate. But it's important for the public to know, and I think for anyone who follows this issue, who have been or in military or national security or intelligence circles, the information I'm messaging, any podcast I do now is strategic. I mean, I'm doing it because there's a message that needs to go out, not just the general public, to people in the general public may have a friend who works at Lockheed Skunk Works, or a friend who is at a base out in Utah, or someone who's operational in Pine Gap, Australia. I mean, we know where all the black sites are. Well, not all of them, a lot of them. We have 155 black sites on our map that's in our archive. Your audience can look at, and a description briefly of what's there. So,
is there any in the Middle East?
Our information on assets outside of CONUS, continental United States, is limited. I have more information, a couple that are in Canada, UK, Australia for sure. When you start getting into other places, I have a couple places in Brazil we know about that are Raytheon operations, and as well as, but the Middle East, I really don't have. Now, certainly Israel would have a compartmented operation dealing with this. Mm-hmm. But as for the other countries, I don't know, and I don't have any sources. In other words, here's what I don't do. I don't get on the internet and Google this ever. I only deal with, like, if you, let's say you were a person who had worked in one of these projects or currently in the projects, we check those people out. We run them through a intel check and background. And if we're comfortable, then that information gets put into unredacted into our archive. Now, what we've released to the public that everyone go see is the redacted archive. There are a lot of names protected and information protected because we have to. But the unredacted will go to these operators. They'll go straight to, not only the law enforcement guys, but the guys who are friendly in the system who don't have all that information. So let me unpack that a little bit. Let's say that you're an operator at the Dugway Proving Grounds, right, in Utah, which is a key facility now. And you may know, and even there, you're only going to be in a compartment operation and know one slice of that pie, right? I mean, very few people have what's called baseline access across a bunch of these programs. So you're going to have your information, but you're not going to know what some other aspect of that base is doing, or never mind what's going on at Nellis, so-called Area 51, or at Edwards, or at, fill in the blanks, Eglin. So that's the problem. So what I've tried to do is be a person who can get this data and information and intelligence from hundreds of sources and try to put it together to the best of our ability. Now, remember, we're not a government entity, and I retired from medicine, and we have one full-time staff member, and everyone else is a volunteer. So it's not like we have, an office building full of people and researchers. It's more of a labor of love that I run out of my house here in Virginia, and DC. But it's the best we can do. But we have a enormous. I can tell you that what we have in our archive and our intelligence base exceeds the entirety of what the constitutional government of the United States has by an order of magnitude. I mean,
and everybody can see this, has access to it.
It's online. Yeah. It take you a couple years. It take you a couple years to get through it. Well, yeah, we just released it, I think, in May, and we're still refining it, but it's a searchable database, and it has enormous amount of information. I think it has 100. I think it has 115 whistleblowers named with their testimony, videotape information, some transcripts and government documents, and then another 600 and some that are redacted names, because those people did not want to be named publicly. But it has a little brief description of what they did and where they were. So that's there for anyone who wants to go through the tedious process of unpacking it.
So for people who are interested in this, and for the more people who are waking up and finding out about it, listening to podcasts, and even for me myself, I watched the Lost Century and How to Reclaim It, which was amazing, and I recommend everybody watch that. But I can't help but feel quite helpless at the end of it. I feel like, well, what can I do? I feel like the only thing I could really do is just tell more people to watch it. But then if more people understand this and learn about it, what can they do? Because it's like out of our control.
The question. Well, I always say the answer to that question is, what can you do? Like, you're helping by getting the word out to more people. And the more people who know about this, the better. And it's a shield for us, right? It is, actually. I mean, back in 1991, I had a intelligence guy say to me, if you're going to do this, and I was already moving in that direction starting in 1990, before most of your listeners were born, I suspect, 34 years ago. And what happened was, he said, you're a dead man walking unless you have the ability to get millions of people who know who you are and what you're doing, because you'll be the tree that fell in the woods. Nobody will ever notice. He says, a lot of people try to do that. I said, well, yeah, but I'm a doctor. I can't. I'm raising four daughters in the suburbs with a golden retriever, and I was, chairman of emergency medicine and stuff. He says, yeah, but, you're going to have to. So that's why I had some people open some doors. And back in the early mid-90s, I was on Larry King Live and some of these shows, and it's very disruptive to my private life, obviously. But his advice was smart. And that's what I tell people. That's something people can do. Now that everyone has social media, they can take our links or your link and put it all over the place, right? And that's how information gets out. They're not going to get it out through CBS or Fox or any of these big networks. The corporate bosses of those networks will kill this story. They'll only tell a little teeny bit of it, and the part of it that's the mostly false part. So let me be real clear on that. The way that works is the mainstream media will only go so far in covering this, and then they cut it off. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Or they'll only feature people like Luis Elizondo, who is a counterintelligence operative. He came out of the Pentagon in a storefront office allegedly dealing with this issue, and it really wasn't. A senior
or
CIA
they'd manipulate the truth.
Well, yeah, because I mean, his line has been, they're a threat to, and of course the new buzzword is NHI, non-human intelligence. I mean, you come up with all these BS euphemisms, and misdirect words like UAP. It used to be UFO, and then it's UAP, unexplained aerial phenomenon. Well, first of all, it's not unexplained. It's not aerial, because they go through space and water and everywhere else, and it's not a phenomenon like a bolide or ball lightning. These are extraterrestrial vehicles, or they're ours. Most of the ones people see are ours. And so there is a narrative where it's very slick. So there's a little bit of truth in what they say, and then a lot of falsehood. And the only way you can push disinformation on the people is to have enough of it that has a ring of truth that hooks them in, and then they carry with them a huge false narrative. So the other false narrative is that, oh, they're a threat to our national security. Actually, the covert group that he's carrying water for is a threat to the national security and world security, people like Elizondo. And the other thing that has been said repeatedly by he and his folks is that we don't have anything that can fly like that. Well, this is nonsense, because we have people on my team who not only piloted the man-made UFOs, they've worked on them, built them, managed the pilots. We have a new whistleblower out of Edwards Air Force Base who managed the pilots who flew the things that look like a disc or a triangle. So, I mean, so this is, this narrative is not only provably false, but you will never see or hear what I just said on a major network.
Yeah.
Why? Because those are integrated vertically and horizontally into the financial system. And the disclosure that we have these technologies that we disclose in the lost century would be the end of that whole upside down pyramid, where a handful of global elite and moneyed interests run the whole planet into the ground. And they are running into the ground. And so the problem is, when you have media that doesn't have integrity anymore, what are you left with? Well, we're left with getting the message out through the alternative media and social media and podcasts and things like this. Because, I have been on shows. I mean, years ago, I was on a show that had about 22 million people listening. There was an old guy named Art Bell who had a show called Coast to Coast AM. It was on the cover of Time at one point because it was the number 4 most listened to radio show in the world at the time, number 4. And there were about 22 million people listening. And he asked me a direct question, and some entity like, I think, Clear Channel bought them. Big corporate entity. It's like what happened with Joe Rogan with Spotify. They had to take my interview out of his lineup in order for Joe Rogan to stay on there.
Is that what happened? Because
Yes.
I wondered where that went.
Well, they had to remove it. They had to remove it. If you want to get $100 million payday like that, you've got to take the truth out. That's the bottom line. So
Has he asked you to go back on again?
No. Oh, no, because I don't think it'd be allowed. I mean, his boss. Remember, your money people are your bosses. Anyone who thinks any of these people. Now, if you're independent, like my group, we don't need money from anyone. I don't care. But if you got those kind of strings, yeah. What's the old saying? He who has the golden rule in business. So if they've got the gold, they rule. So these multi-billion-dollar operations rule this. And when I started talking to this guy, it was some years ago, and he asked me, it was a live satellite global show with 22 million people listening. And he started asking me to start naming some of the people on this committee running these programs. And I started to. And I landed on one guy who's been very involved since the 70s named Dick Cheney. But at the time, he was the vice president of the United States. And immediately we went to an unscheduled commercial break. A voice broke in from the satellite, true story, and said, Dr. Greer, change the direction of this conversation now, or we're going to dump this show live. I said, you're going to dump this show with 22 million? He says, yes, we'll have a technical difficulty. And I said, then you tell the guy asking me the questions not to ask me. I'm not here to cover your ass. I'm here to tell the truth. But if he asks me the question, I'm going to tell the truth. So this is one of my problems, is that I am not going to falsely give witness to this. I'm going to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But that gets you banned. I mean, go ask Tony Robbins. He's a guy I know and a friend. What happened to him when he tried to put some information out about COVID with a group of Nobel Prizing molecular biologists and geneticists, and YouTube tore it right down off of the YouTube system.
How is your documentary not being taken down?
It is down now. The corporation that was the distributor took 100% of the revenue from that and then declared bankruptcy. So it's now off of all those platforms. It's on my YouTube channel.
I had to find it on Pirate Bay to watch it.
Yeah, yeah,
because it was so difficult
because
to find.
well, and see that the other thing they're trying to do is starve us of any funds and resources. That movie cost the better part of $1 million to make and distribute and market, and 100% of the revenue was taken. And then that company went into Chapter 7, and 100% of the money was wiped out in the last 3 or 4 months. So this is what keeps happening to us through these corrupt people. But that's why we kind of exist off the kindness of strangers and people willing to help us. But we need some good lawyers too. But but it wouldn't matter. I mean, once you go into Chapter 7, it liquidates the company and everything's wiped out. So, and that's what they did. The CEO of that company just used up all the money and never paid us. So we had, and with that, of course, then it came down off of Amazon and off of Tubi. And so now we are getting a new distributor to put it back up. In the meanwhile, it's on my YouTube channel and on some other illegal sites, which, look, we crowdfund our films, which means they're produced by people making donations, right? So my view of it is that we're not doing this for the money. If I wanted money, I'd still be a trauma doctor, right? Making $600,000 a year instead of zero. But love that I did well enough that I don't need money at this stage in my life. So, and invested. But I think that for the most part, most people aren't going to stay in this game, because if they start breaking out with the information like we have, there's so many ways to shut you down. And the financial part is one of them. Luckily I've been fortunate to have done okay.
I have a question for you guys. Do you take supplements? And if you do you really know what supplements you should be taking? You see, this is a problem I had for years. I would walk into a supplement store, I would buy loads of random bottles of supplements and just pop pills every day, hoping for the best. But in reality, I had no idea whether or not I should be consuming these supplements. That is where Bionic came into the picture and solved that problem. You see, I've been working with Bionic for the past couple of years, and since 2021, I've been getting my blood work done with them every 3 to 4 months. And based on that blood work, they send it off to get analyzed, and then they put together a very specific customized formula for me, which will last me for 3 to 4 months until I get my next blood work done. And honestly, it's been an absolute game changer for me. They also offer another product called Bionic Go, where all you need to do is go onto the website, fill in questionnaire, and then based on that questionnaire, they can give you your customized supplements. So if that sounds like something that would be of interest, which I highly recommend, go onto the website, bionic.com, and you can use the link in my description to get a nice little discount on your first order. So what is an ideal situation for you? Like if things could go your way within the next couple of years, how would it look?
I think the way it would look would be, there are a growing number of people who will defect from these programs who are operational with the materiel. The law enforcement special access project team, which has got assets all over the United States, would take possession of these. Those would first be disclosed to the members of the United States government. And I've been asked to be the person there to sort of take them through what all this is, because it's complicated. I mean, it's very complicated, because you're going to have to show them extraterrestrial vehicles, man-made ones that are knockoffs that look very similar, extraterrestrial bodies, man-made aliens that look like them that have been used in the abductions and mutilations, and a whole bunch of other stuff that no one on the special access project teams know the details of, because they haven't been read in. And I've been basically read in by over 1,000 people over the years. I mean, we have 762 people in the archive, but some of them that have come to me aren't in there because they would never give us their names. But, they had really important information or documents they gave us. So, so that's why, that would happen. And then it would be released to the public. And then after that, the information would be disclosed in a non-threatening way. Say, look, we're not alone. They're here. There's no evidence they're hostile, but we have been acquiring them, and we're going to change this. We're going to stop targeting them. We're going to start a peaceful ambassador type program to them, which is the first thing I started in 1990 was sort of a citizen diplomacy outreach to these civilizations. And then we're going to release the technologies that are okay to release at this stage of human development. Now, I will say,
what do you mean by what do you mean okay at this stage? Like you can't release everything.
Let me
in one go?
show I'll show you the courtesy of being blunt. I would say 90% of the technologies that have been reverse engineered could not be released in the current situation with human social and spiritual evolution. They would be used by other dictators and miscreants and megalomaniacs as weapon systems. For example, let's say that you have the ability, a man-made UFO that can go from hover to over the horizon in 2 seconds. We're talking 100,000 miles per hour or more with no sonic boom and no fuel and no rocket, using electromagnetic field propulsion and this advanced physics, this transdimensional physics, which we haven't talked about. We understand how that works. But let's say you have a terrorist in Mogadishu, I don't know, wherever on the planet, and they want to develop that and then deliver a dirty bomb over Dubai or Washington or London. How are you going to control that genie, right? So there's some definite problems with all the technologies being full Monty boom put out there in the current state of the world. But the current state of the world, remember, is in large part dysfunctional because the more elementary energy technologies have been withheld. Well, let me unpack that for a minute. Imagine if 100 years ago, these technologies that would have given us free energy, quote unquote, from the vacuum or the quantum vacuum, 0 point, and everyone in the world had free energy. There was no poverty in the world by now, none. So there would be justice and abundance. We wouldn't be having all the conflicts we had. Now, there could be some, but I think it would be greatly ameliorated by the fact that there would be sort of a just and prosperous world instead of a world of the rich and a handful of people doing well. And right now there are 3 billion people on the planet don't even have energy to cook their food. They're cutting down rainforests and desert shrubs, and the deserts are growing and growing because we're cutting down all the foliage to make charcoal or to cook. So when you have a situation like that, it's a true Malthusian crisis. So where the population is huge, but living off an 1800s energy paradigm. So it's going to take a while for us to do a catch up on that 100 years of lost evolution and therefore become peaceful. Because if we're not peaceful, if all these technologies are not ultimately the solution, I mean, the energy generation ones that are stationary or they'll be in the hood of your car or running your house or business or factory, yes. But the ones that are these advanced propulsion and advanced, let's call it transdimensional or interdimensional technologies, those things getting weaponized, which they have been by this criminal organization. That's what's scary. Those being weaponized by John Q. dictator in some, failed state place is a true threat to the stability of the whole planet. I'll be blunt. That can't happen yet. Not without some kind of world security pact that ensures that none of these things can be used for weapons. And
well, then could you argue that the people who are currently in control of that technology, they don't necessarily have bad intentions?
Oh, they definitely have bad intentions because we know what they've been doing and we know what their plans are.
What are the plans?
Yeah, I don't know.
Just to take over the world. Okay.
They already have done that. People just don't know it. That's already happened. No, it's okay. Their long-term agenda is global destruction and population reduction. So they have the ability to pretty much wipe out 4 to 6 billion people. And I think that's their intention. And I think that's not far off. I don't want to go into all that. I know exactly what they have, where it's positioned, what buttons they can push. And I've known about it since the mid 90s. So, I'm a serious person. I left my medical career because I realized how bad this situation is. And I always joke, being an emergency guy with specializing in major trauma, I know an emergency when I see one, and we're in an emergency, but nobody knows it. It's the frog being cooked in the pot. It's slowly going to boil us. And I mean, parts of this organization, they're so elitist. They want to get rid of people, but there's another weird, kind of kooky, a really weird part of them. Always like telling this story. This is illustrative. 1994, I'm meeting with the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, Prince Hans-Adam von Liechtenstein. And when we first connected, he was at his palace castle, and I was at home. And he said, "We can't talk about this. Let's meet privately." So we eventually met in New York City at the Pier Four Seasons there on Fifth Avenue near Central Park, and met for hours. And he eventually told me that the reason he was funding all the abduction groups and mutilation groups, because he was the one putting all the money behind Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and Mack and all these people. And most of those guys didn't know that the abductions they were studying were being done by CIA and other operatives using these technologies they've reverse engineered, made to look like aliens. It's all a stagecraft. It's all ridiculously fake. But the gullible public believes it, right? But he said, the reason I'm doing that is that we have to have an interplanetary war and Armageddon so Christ will return. And now I'm quoting. And I went, excuse me? And it turned out he was the major funder for a far extreme group at the Vatican known as Opus Dei, and was very devoted to this idea that Christ will only return when enough of the world is destroyed, enough of the population is destroyed that it forces the return of Christ. So I'm there just listening politely going, WTF, right? What? And then I realized that there's a component of this group that are like that. And then there's another component, and this is the chief mentor for Luis Elizondo, that honestly are Satanists who love destruction, love torture, love to see war, like to see suffering. They're weird people, and I know them. I know who they are. So you have, kind of like two sides of this bizarre, I would call it psychopathic. I mean, medically speaking, the guys are sociopaths and psychopaths, but high functioning. They're smart.
Yeah.
Like Adolf Hitler and his henchmen, he was a dummy, but the people around him were evil geniuses, right? I mean, the way they executed all that horrible stuff. So you do have this part of human nature, and those are the guys who are aggressive enough that they've taken over all these operations. Now, there are others who are there just for more prosaic, the banality of evil. They want to control the money. They have integrated, financial interest in Wall Street and the petrodollar and oil or public utilities or whatever it is. I mean, everyone has something they're trying to protect, right? And by the way, the release of even the most elementary of these technologies that would liberate us with free energy would alter all of that. I mean, I recently helped put together a black paper for a $3 trillion investment fund where they're learning this is true, and they're going, what's going to happen to our mutual fund? I said, well, it's going to go the way of royal typewriters or horse and buggies, unless you get on ahead of the curve here and get ready for it, because we're only going to need oil for plastics and chemicals and things. Public utilities will all go away because every house and business will have their own source. Eventually, once the anti-gravity devices come out, when we're more peaceful, we're not going to need roads. So there goes a multi-trillion-dollar part of the global economy, road building and infrastructure. So, I mean, this is a huge societal change. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of it at all. I mean, it's so grave, the changes, but it should have started happening 100 years ago. This is the problem.
How do you see our civilization turning peaceful, though? Like, I like to be optimistic, but from what I see and the amount of evil there is in the world, I just can't see that going away anytime soon. Even if, okay, there is now free unlimited energy, how does that get rid of evil?
I don't think it gets rid of evil, but at least it creates let's call it a environment, a milieu, where in that environment, you can have the foundation for a just and peaceful society. And that won't happen overnight. I think the initial phase of this will be what's called the piece of the chained dogs, the rabid dogs that need to be put on chains. But see, here's the problem. Up until now, no president or no prime minister or anyone's been willing to put those dogs on a chain because they're so ruthless, they're willing to just flat out kill people. So that's where I get back to where I'm hopeful. I know this sounds crazy because I've worked for peace and, peaceful contact with these civilizations for 34 years. But sometimes when a situation is what it is on Earth today, you need people to come forward who will be what they used to be called, the Shambhala warriors, the spirit warriors in Native America. My grandmother was Cherokee, the spirit warriors, who are willing to stand up to evil and stand those down. So far, no one has been willing to stand up to this cabal of crazy people because of the power they have, but also because of the technologies they have. And so I think it's daunting. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When I meet with these special forces guys, we did a retreat last year for the top commanders for this team. And I told them very bluntly, this isn't, the Middle East, Bosnia, Afghanistan. This will be the most unbelievable battle of your lives. And, some of them had missing limbs and things from conflicts but are senior now. And I go, look, I mean, this is the big one, right? That your whole life's been preparing for. And, some of the Green Berets are going, well, yeah, we learned about this now and we're ready. Now, this is why when I talk about courage, this is not a theoretical thing. Just exactly which politician do you know on the planet is going to stand up with people with that kind of power and technology who are just flat out willing to smoke you and your whole family? Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And that's what I've been waiting to have come forward for 30 years, and now it's coming forward. So I'm optimistic about that. So that initial period could be the piece of the chain dogs, because they're not only talking about doing this CONUS, but OCONUS outside the continental United States, and fix this problem. Now, if that fails, then I'd say, fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride for a little bit. Now, the last step on the F train here, let's call it the end of the algorithm, as we'd say, in code blue when someone's cardiac arrest. The end of the algorithm here would be off-planet intervention by extraterrestrial. So now that's not going to happen except in the very worst scenario. And let's hope that doesn't happen, right? But I think it would if things went to DEFCON 1. If we go to defense condition 1 and there's nuclear war or there's a massive geophysical event that happens that's catastrophic, I think there would be a very substantial extraterrestrial intervention. In fact, I know there would be. What's riskier is something in between, and that is, as our technologies have gone up and up and up, we are beginning to reach parity or at the same level of what some of the ET technologies are, where we're a threat to them and their worlds. At some point, what I've heard from people in these covert programs from 3 separate people in communication centers is that the ETs are not going to let that continue indefinitely. At some point, they're going to have to shut those systems down to protect innocent planets out there and innocent people out in space. So this is another big problem. I'm being very blunt about this in the last year or so with members of Congress. I said, you guys are fiddling while Rome's burning. And, the ETs are not hostile, but they're not idiots. I mean, there's a universal right to self-defense. But for them to stand down all those systems, because they're in space, they're on ships, they're on land, they're everywhere from the South Pole to Antarctica, to stand that down would be portrayed by this organization and their lackeys in the media as an alien invasion, which is why they won't do it. They won't do it until it's a worst case scenario. I mean, look, if I figured this out with my meager IQ, I know these civilizations have, because they cruise around with IQs of 400 to 600 equivalent. Top of the human scale is 200. So, I mean, right? So, I mean, these are not stupid.
They would try, and these organizations would try and unite the world to go against the aliens.
That's their whole agenda. The whole agenda since 1953, at least. I have a CIA document, it's in the archive by the CIA director, General Bedell Smith. And he talks about the psychological warfare value of the UFO issue. Now, this is what now? 71 years ago. And then, fast forward to 1985, and we have Dr. Jacques Vallée has a document from the CIA, although he's been intimidated not to release it. But in his book, he refers to it and says that the CIA was going all through Latin America using our technologies to abduct peasants, as it said, specifically in Argentina and Brazil, for its psychological warfare value, meaning that they wanted there to be a specter of fear and to present the aliens as a threat so that the world could be united around a military, sort of fascist military entity that this organization would control and would be focused towards fighting the aliens. It'd be like the movie Independence Day, right? And so go look at that movie. It's actually out of CIA scripting. So that game has been played since the 50s. So now we're 70 years into a, let's call it PSYOP, psychological warfare operation, that 99% of the UFO subculture and the public and movies and Hollywood and UFO conferences and books ad nauseum have focused on. And that is, it's all false staged events. The mutilations, cattle mutilations. I know the guys doing that. The abductions, I know the guys who've done that. I have people on my team who have been on the man-made UFOs abducting people, and some of them who've worked on the little creatures that are manufactured that look like aliens, the little gray bug-eyed ones. That's not an ET.
Yeah, they're never portrayed to be the good guys.
Well, no, but that's the thing. I mean, except for the movie E.T. and maybe Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind from the 70s. Yeah, every other movie is this fearsome alien invasion flick. By the way, there are people in Hollywood who wanted to do a true story on this, and they get shot down. The corporate Hollywood won't do it. They'll only greenlight these movies that are terrifying, alien invasion movies. So this is another psyop. Anyone who thinks that there's not corruption in Hollywood in the movies we see, who greenlights a $200 million flick and who pays for it? And who's going to distribute it, right? Well, it's the same conglomerates that control the corporate media. So I hate to sound, people say you're terribly cynical. I said, no, I wasn't. I learned through the School of Hard Knocks. I met with senior people in Hollywood who want to do a real movie about this, and they cannot, it'll go to a very high level and then get killed and get strangled in the cradle, which is why what's being force-fed to the public is the false narrative that people like Luis Elizondo and others want the public to hear, that it's an alien threat. Because two things that this group wanted to do in the 50s. They wanted to keep the technologies away from the public, and they wanted to develop it for themselves through reverse engineering and capturing more ET vehicles. But the other part of it was to begin this psychological warfare program that the CIA director refers to in 1953, so that people would become convinced that there was a threat that would unite the world, not in peace and prosperity, but in this fearsome battle between Earth and other worlds. And who benefits from that? People say, why would they do that? I said, of course, think about how much the military, industrial, corporate, warmonger complex makes. It's very profitable. Now you would take it and put it on steroids, where it's the whole damn planet buying into this narrative. And war and division is a great way to control a populace. This is why demagogues, whether they be political, religious, whatever, demagogues always love conflict, because the divide and conquer mentality. Heaven forbid we would unite the world in peace, realizing that we're one beautiful planet floating in space with a few billion people, but there are all these other planets out there, and we could actually live together in a peaceful existence in a productive, very high-tech society for thousands of years. No, because that would submarine their central control systems, which are based on our energy system, and their central political narrative, which is to control people through conflict. never-ending conflict. And if peace starts to break out somewhere, they have agitators that go in and blow it up again. And that's been the story of the last century, unfortunately. And I think, if all this is very interrelated to this UFO ET issue, and which is why Eisenhower, getting back to what we were talking about a little while ago, is why Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex being a threat to our democracy and our way of life. And he knew this. He knew what this agenda was. And he knew that because he was a good man trying to do the right thing, he was shoved right out of the inner circle and lost control. And to my knowledge, no president per se has had, let's say, operational control over those projects since the 50s. I think it was fairly intact under Truman. It was sort of read in and properly managed until about the 1956 by Eisenhower, and then it went poof. That group had enough technology. And I remember the other big breakthrough happened in October 1954. And that's the date when we mastered what's called gravity control, where we could manufacture our own UFO objects. So the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs in Washington, which is the biggest Department of Defense lab in the world, he was the top scientist there. He was in the vault, as we call it, and saw the documentation that was the date where we mastered anti-gravity or gravity control. And so,
do you think there was do you think there was an ancient civilization that also mastered it? The ones that arguably built the pyramids?
Well, probably. I mean, I don't think the pyramids were built with pulleys and chains and ropes and slaves. I mean, the way they're cut and placed would indicate that there was some very advanced technology. Now, was that a holdover from a prior civilization or even some cooperation between that ancient time and ETs? Maybe. Again, I try to deal with, what I can prove. And when you start going back that far in time, you're looking through a glass dimly. But if you were asking what my opinion is, is that yes, there was clearly ancient times where we had contact with ETs or pyramids all over the planet. I think ancient people did have contact. I think we had a civilization here that had pretty advanced technology, but had not become socially or spiritually evolved enough and blew itself up. I mean, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita in India, there are accounts of what sounds like a nuclear war and vimanas, these objects flying in the sky that look like UFOs, from very, very old. We don't even know how old those accounts are from the Vedic and ancient in India. So we know that there was a civilization once on Mars millions of years ago that might have destroyed itself. So the question is, and here, this is the big existential question. What are we living on Earth right now today going to choose? Are we going to choose peace on Earth and in space? Because you can't have, if there is no peace without it being universal, meaning on Earth and in space, or are we going to choose extinction? I think, honestly, that's our choice. And this right now in the next few years is when we have to make it, because it's coming to a head. So, there have been civilizations that have just been wiped out, and then they emerge like the phoenix out of the ashes, right? I mean, that's one outcome. It's not a pretty one for humanity right now, but it's happened, and I think it's happened in the past, in what the best I can tell from studying that. But I can't prove what I just said. The other things I've been talking about, I can absolutely prove. But what I'm saying now is, let's call it informed speculation. So.
Well, to me, it would make sense.
It does make sense
for sure.
Yep.
One thing which I've been curious about is, after watching The Lost Century and hearing repeatedly of all these inventors that had figured out a way to build these devices that would either provide free energy or would allow cars to operate without a combustion engine, how did none of this stuff get leaked?
Oh, it did.
Like, how was it? It did.
There's a reason we know about it. Now, in our archive is something called the Sajaki files, who was a CIA operative that a friend of mine who's now passed away, John Bedini, was allowed to copy hundreds of pages of patents that were confiscated of these energy devices. It's in the archive. Go look at it.
What and how to
And,
build them and operate them?
well, that's the question. What I've been recommending from some people who have the wherewithal to do it. I mean, you could throw a rock from your place and hit a few billionaires right there who could fund this if they wanted to. It'd be the biggest technology play, way bigger than anything Elon Musk has ever done, to support an open source energy lab where we would take that intel as well as some people that I could pull out of these covert programs to engineer and bring out one of these devices. The problem is when that's been attempted before. I mean, I know an organization years ago had $100 million to do it, and that whole thing was infiltrated, taken down, people killed. You have to do it in a very specific, strategic way. It has to be open source. It can't be a patent. It can't be secret. I would have the whole lab wired to the internet, even through similar to blockchain systems that can't be taken down. With any discovery that happens in real time goes out to the world. So you cannot black shelve it. And if we controlled it, we would not sell it out either. Because that's the other problem. A lot of these devices, someone comes along and says, oh, this is great. And you're some guy who's in a lab at Lawrence Berkeley Labs or at his garage, and they're offered $50 million, right? And they don't have a pot to pee in right now. They go, oh, great, thank you. Well, that entity takes it, put it on a shelf, keeps it secret. Other people have just been flat out killed. Patents have been confiscated. Financial traps have been set. That's a big way that you do this. So we have mapped out, more than a dozen strategies that have been deployed to keep these technologies off the market. So what we would do if we had funding, and I think you'd have to have at least 20 to 50 million to do it, is have a strategy where it would be a multi-centered lab. You'd have the central and then satellite labs with people working on this. Open source it like GitHub, like the software company did for solutions. And then any breakthroughs would be released to the whole world without charge right away. Now, people say, well, then why would someone invest in that? I said, well, look, I mean, GitHub became a multi-billion-dollar company and it was open source. You can still monetize it down the road, but at the first stage of it, it needs to be open sourced. At the second stage, then there'd be 1,000 companies building better mousetraps. But the entity that would be starting this would be on the ground floor. And which people shouldn't think of this competitively, because you've got 8 billion people living like cavemen, burning coal and oil and gas and wood like we did in the 17 and 1800s. And how are you going to retrofit this whole planet, right? You need all hands on deck here. And so I view it as a win-win. But most business people who have a financial mindset, they're smart with money, but they're not smart about this. Okay. And so that's what we need to find, some people who have the resources, who would understand this strategy and why the strategy has been developed the way we have developed it. But it would be the less money you have, the more likely a failure, because you're going up against these organizations that have trillions. And so it's a heavy lift. Now, the other part of it is that if we were to get to that point, and I think we would, and within a year or two, where we had a device that was operational, that would be handed over to the public, but we would build up 100 of them. And, I would have, Demi Lovato's home being run off of it. And some of the celebrity actors who follow our work have their cars running on it, pull out all the batteries out of their Tesla and solder close the electric plug-in and just have it run forever on a 0-point energy generation that's in the hood. In other words, you would do the work around the mainstream media that will never cover this properly. So that's the other part of the strategy. Now that's expensive because you got to stand it up quickly and you got to reach out to those people and you got to push. Because if you have a few celebrities that can reach about 2 billion people in a 2-week period, who needs CNN and Fox or the BBC? Because those guys have a few 100,000 or a couple million viewers. So my strategy is radical and complicated, but it's based on having studied how some of the people I've worked with who've been geniuses, who've had these technologies, and how they've been knocked out of the ballpark. Unfortunately, every single one of the people I know who developed these, they won't do this strategy. They're wanting for a big personal payday. So that's the other thing. The scientists who have this, we may have to say, here, you can get some back end percent, but bring your information in. Here's $5 million. Have a nice life, right? Or something. But there are all kinds of deals that might have to be struck because humans, being what they are, self-interested, avaricious, greedy primates. Not a complimentary assessment, but true. Just look around the world. You're going to have enough. You're going to have to be backstopped with someone with deep enough pockets to do whatever's necessary. But it can't be done conventionally. It can't be done through patents and intellectual property secrets. And it can't be disclosed normally, like a normal technology. You've got to have these alternative ways of getting it out. So it's a let's just say that business plan would not fly in Silicon Valley, probably because it doesn't check the boxes that the venture capital people want to hear. So you'd have to find someone who would understand that. And last year I had a meeting with he's one of the wealthiest people in the United Kingdom, multi-billionaire. And he didn't understand the strategy. He said, well, if we put the money, we'll have to. I said, well, with all due respect, what do you know about national security and how this is going to be done? He didn't know anything. But of course, he conflated his wealth with strategic intelligence, of which he had none. So he was a multi-billionaire that had a strategic intelligence of zero, but had been good at hedge funds and churning Wall Street to make, $15 billion. But that's not what's needed here. I mean, you need the resources, and we would need people who have the financial knowledge and business knowledge, because I'm not a business guy. I'm a medical doctor and scientist. But you certainly don't want some amateur in there mucking up the strategy, because that's how you get everyone killed. I mean, the people who took over Stan Meyer's stuff, all of them were killed. And the very rich person who funded the people who got Stan Meyer's car, which was the running on fuel, with water, only water. And then he also had a donut-shaped free energy device that no one knew about. We knew about it because we went and saw it. That had a national security order on it. But that team that got funded and that the heirs sold that, let's say, that whole collection to, they all got wiped out. But right before they did, the chief funder calls me up and says, Dr. Greer, what do we do? I said, well, you do. And I wrote a whole strategic paper on what they need to do within 48 hours. And he said, well, they won't do it because they're wanting to monetize it. They're wanting to get the money. They're wanting to get I said, then they're dead men or they're going to disappear. I think only one of those guys survived that I know about. So, and this happened recently, not that long ago. So, this is not a theoretical conspiracy theory. This happens. And, you'd have to find some people or a group of people who have enough net worth to stand up an operation to do it. I think if that happened, we could get these technologies out within a year or two. And
I feel like Elon Musk is the type of person who would get behind it. From what I've seen from his interviews and everything.
I've heard that he wouldn't because of the risks. So again, I mean, look, we can sit here and name, there are 3,000 billionaires on the planet now. We need to find somebody with the resources who actually. Here's what the missing element is. Ultimately, it's the strategic intelligence and the courage, because ultimately, people are going to look at this and they may have someone visit them and say, "Don't touch that," or "We're going to pull the plug on your SpaceX program," or "Don't touch that," or "We're going to pull the plug on whatever." So I think people know, who's buttering everyone's bread here, right? And at that level. And so a lot of those folks, do they have the ability to? Do they have the intelligence to understand it? Sure. Do they have the courage to go the distance on it? I think not. Not so far. I mean, look, I'm pretty well known in these circles, and I know most of these folks, but I don't see that. I mean, I think it's more likely you're going to get, 10 high net worth people, but not people with that kind of power and societal position to come together and do it. But right now it's theoretical because no one's ever gone, the distance on it. I wish they would, but not that I need another thing on my plate right now, but it needs to happen. And we certainly have the information to make a real go at it, and more than anyone in the world, because everyone who's tried to do it, like we show this in the film, we went out to the desert in Arizona, and this guy had this thing putting out 5 kilowatts of free energy, but he was already entrapped in a financial scheme, and he believed that he could do this and keep it secret and make all the money. And he just had this old paradigm of tech, startup, venture capital mindset. And now, a couple years later, it's in the wind. So I've seen that happen 100 times, and the film documents it for over 100 years. So, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. At a certain point, we have to learn from the mistakes of the past, right? I don't see that yet, but
No.
we can hope and pray we do. So
If there's one person you could sit down and have a conversation with, who would it be?
Well, that's a very good question. I probably shouldn't say it because I'm about ready to have those conversations, both in the UK and here. So, but you can figure out who this would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd like to have a conversation with people who have, whoever the next occupant of the White House is, and whoever the current head of government in the United Kingdom. I hate to say it, the two crown jewels. The United States with their special relationship with the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth and the Five Eyes countries. That would be the most important conversation if whoever would be in that position would go forward. And there are indications that might happen. So I'm very non-political because I have to brief and work with everyone on every side of every aisle here and around the world. But I would say that there's some hopeful developments in that front. We're very hopeful.
And even if you get the opportunity to sit down and speak to presidents, that doesn't realistically have much of an impact.
It could if they have the courage and the information, and that's what we're building on. So I'm just saying there's some indicators that may be the case now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What are you working on? Any current projects at the end of this year or next year?
Mm-hmm. Well, the main project we're working on, the ones I referred to with the Special Access Project, and we want to have some events next year. That we've done all the public events we're going to do this year. The rest of this year, we're going to be very tied up with the archive, which, by the way, we have a crowdfunding project for that because it's free for everyone, but it's cost us over $500,000 to get it there. So we're crowdfunding that archive so we can keep it free to the public. There's no fee. I mean, you have to register, so we keep bots out of it. But you don't have to pay anything per month or anything. It's free. And it's 34 years of our content out there. So I would suggest that people, do that, but support it if they can. It's kind of like Wikipedia. It's publicly supported because the hosting charges and the IT team, and we had to develop a specialized database. I mean, we spent about $500,000 on that. So we need help with that. So people can donate a buck or $1 million, whatever. Our goal is about $1 million, and we're at 476,000. So we're almost halfway.
For people who are going there for the first time, how would you advise them to navigate through the masses of information that's on there?
Well, luckily we put them into categories. So we have right now 13. We're going to add another category soon, which are my intelligence briefings, which will be redacted, the ones I've done for special forces and people like that. But if you're interested in crash retrievals, There's a whole section. If you're interested in the black sites, there's a whole section for facilities, black sites, corporations, map of where they all are. If you're interested in whistleblower testimony, we have 115 of them in there with their testimony. You can read the transcripts or go through the. If you're interested in government documents, we have it organized by country. So we have KGB, or the Soviet, Russian, US, UK, Australia, anyway, in Canada. So we have those organized in by country, and you can go through. Now, what we need to do, and we need an archivist to do this, is to then go in and refine it further. So in other words, let's say you have however many hundreds of documents under US, prioritize them 1 through 200 or whatever. If you're interested in abductions and how that's all come about, there's a whole section on that, and the exposés on how they were doing it, and documents showing that. If you're interested in, it depends what you're interested in. So by going through the categories, and then under each category we have subcategories, right? So when you get in there, you'll see that, and then that's how you can navigate through. Because it's too much to. The reason it took so much time and work to do it is putting all these into categories and subcategories with a searchable database, and it does have an OCR, but also has through the database itself. You can anything that's titled, its title or its category. If you search it, it pops up. So it has a search engine in it.
Has it got anything about aliens and what they might potentially want with us?
Oh yeah, there's a whole section on that because it has all the CE5, the close encounters of the fifth kind content, and our experiences with the ETs. And I don't call them aliens because most people in America think those are people from Mexico or some country. I mean, they're considered immigrants. So it's a word that most people don't when you say it. But the EBINs, the extraterrestrial biological entities, there's a whole section on that as well. And what our assessment is, but also our experiences, photographs of them, video, all kinds of fun stuff that's in there about contact and what experiences we've had over the years. So that is one of the 13 categories.
What's if you could summarize it, what do you believe their purposes for us, or what you believe they're doing?
Well, number one, I think they're hopeful that we actually make this transition to a peaceful civilization and can join them as part of a interplanetary society, for lack of a better word. That's number one on the agenda. And in the meanwhile, I think they're monitoring how things are developing here to contain anything that gets out of control, including our threat to this world, but to their world. So I think that's the key thing. But I think they're very interested in people who are understanding this in let's call it a deeper way. In other words, what's the foundation of, and maybe this crosses over to what some people call spirituality, but what's the foundation of peace or unity between humans and these civilizations? It isn't our humanity. It can't be humanism because they're not human. But what are they? They're conscious, sentient life forms. And when you cut through all the nonsense, the color of awareness, the color of consciousness, of sentientness, has no color. It has no race. It has no species. It's consciousness. So before I was a doctor, I was a meditation teacher and studied the Vedas and Sanskrit. So I became very proficient in that science of consciousness, which was lucky because it informed me of understanding even how these ET technologies work, which is, if you imagine technologies that interface directly with thought and consciousness, that's what they have. We're not talking Neuralink like Elon Musk thing. That's at the speed of light, right? Those are wired or wireless. We're talking, what is a quanta of thought? What is the consciousness field? What is quantum entanglement on a conscious level? There's a whole section of the archive on this. Some people think it's very esoteric, but I said, no, it's operational. Because if you're from another star system, you're going to have to communicate at the speed of not light, but of instantaneous quantum entanglement. And quantum entanglement, what that is where every point in space and time is instantly folded within each other. And the only way the most effective way to do that is through field consciousness and thought, which is the ultimate entangled field. But you have to have the technological refinement, let's call it, to be able to do that. So their technologies are both consciousness assisted technologies, where the conscious mind or intention that you think to this computer and it does what you want, or the reverse, where the technology assists your own consciousness in seeing or gathering information. So it's a little bit like a high-tech version of the CIA remote viewing program, where people use consciousness, to spy on the Soviet Union, like Ingo Swann, who was a friend of mine before he died, and who was a famous CIA remote viewer, using consciousness to spy on the Soviet Union and stuff. But that whole area that people go, whoa, this is way out stuff. I say, yeah, well, you think they're using Ma Bell's phone? They're not going to be using they're not using your cell phone that's using, I mean, let's face it, this thing, it's a piece of rubbish, right? It's moving, it's 1844. 1844 was when we sent the first telegraph, at the speed of light. But if you're a million light years from Earth, right, or an Andromeda galaxy, the nearest galaxy to us is 2.5 million light years, it would take 2.5 million years for that signal to get there, and another 2.5 million for it to come back. Too slow. So now you start crossing into what the CIA people call WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. Weird stuff. But where it's only weird because we've been denied the information on it. But it's the whole interesting nexus of where consciousness, thought, and technology come together, these three things. And that's the most interesting physics and science involved in all of this, way more so than the free energy or the anti-gravity, that sort of clunky stuff from the mid 20th century. This is the really cool stuff. But
if it was made public that aliens are real, they announce it, and we see them, how do you think we react to that? And what do you think happens to religion?
Two good questions. Yeah. What I think the reaction is going to be exactly proportional to how it's presented. If it's an announcement, there are two announcements. Here's the proof, we're not alone, and they're here to eat us for lunch and to attack us, and we need interplanetary war. Panic in the streets. The other is, they're here, there's no evidence they're hostile. They're concerned about our hostility, but we need to develop a plan to make peaceful contact with them, and a plan to bring out some of these technologies that can be safely deployed, and we'll have a whole new world. So one's a very unifying message and that takes us into the future. The other one is Armageddon. And right now, the thrust in ufology and Elizondo and the media is Armageddon. I mean, their whole messaging, though they won't say it, is global fear and destruction and more. So it really depends on who and how that message is portrayed to the public. So if it comes out very publicly, who's going to coach and mentor the president or the UN Secretary General or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom or the King of England or whoever to speak of this, right? Whoever the head of state is. Similarly, in our diplomatic corps, how are they going to react to this? So I think that so much of this depends, in my opinion, on the consciousness behind it. What's the intent of the disclosure? And if you'll see in the archive, I wrote a paper in 1999. It's called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. And it's what I'm talking about right here, is when people disclose this, but in a way that serves the secret agenda of disunity and war and profiteering and all that. And that's what's unfortunately unfolding on one level. On another level, we're trying to do an honest disclosure that would be peaceful and unifying and hopeful. But we're up against the machine, as it were. I talk about Rage Against the Machine. We're up against this big machine that is hell-bent and has been for 70 years at portraying this as a threat. Now, if that's the disclosure that happens, it's going to be very bad for the future, frankly. So a big part of this is, how is it disclosed? Who discloses it? So the answer to your question is, it depends on the context and the narrative on that. Now, as far as organizers, I've been at the Vatican and with some other religious leaders around the world, and I don't think there'd be a problem with it, except amongst the most lunatic fringe 10, 15% of fanatics, right? Who are going to view anything that isn't within their understanding of their scripture as an agent of Satan or something. I mean, there are some people who, view anything that isn't explicitly in their catechism as some kind of, threat or evil. But I haven't seen that when I've met with mainstream, pretty senior people at the Vatican, and astronomer and the Vatican Intelligence Service guys and others. Years ago, I spent a lot of time with Monsignor Balducci, who is a senior theologian to the Pope, and they all had this perspective I'm giving, right? They didn't have a problem with it. And the same thing with other religious leaders. The Dalai Lama would not have a problem in Buddhism. I've had people reach out to me from India who are leaders in the Hindu thought. So I don't think, I think in the Muslim world, it would actually be, could be understood with some of the teachings that are in their tradition about this. And Jewish, I mean, you have, what is it, Ezekiel's wheel, and there are references, I think, in the Old Testament to things that clearly sound like a UFO and contact events. So, I think it could be, you could connect those dots, and it could actually be something that transcends all those fracture lines and unifies people, right? But again, it depends on, if you have a bunch of demagogues wanting to divide people so they fight, then you have another outcome. So much of it is who are people going to listen to, and how is this going to be articulated, and what's the lexicon? What words are chosen, and what's the narrative that gets foisted on the public? And I think that's where this is dangerous, because humans don't have a great track record of taking information and then not corrupting the knowledge, right? So this is what this, personally, this is what you're asking about is my biggest worry, is that, this comes out, but it ends up empowering the very monsters who are currently keeping it secret, right? So this is where a lot of people say I can be very combative with certain folks who are out there doing. I said, yeah, I am, because I'm trying to protect the human future here. The human future is hanging in the balance, is how this is being discussed. And right now, there are people running around on Capitol Hill and elsewhere giving false information to people who don't know any better. And I know that happened to past presidents, for a fact. So, and then they're manipulated into bad actions and wrong policies. So it's a real complicated problem when you have folks who are in there who are foxes in the hen house, who present themselves as objective scientists or someone in the military or former military, and they're actually carrying water for the organization that wants to have interplanetary war. I mean, that's to make it very simplistic. So I think whether it's religious entities or the general public, I think that it's, and unfortunately, I think it's one or the other. I mean, the way this gets disclosed, the narrative that it's attached to it is going to be something that could determine whether it's a very unifying and wonderful event for humanity or something not so great.
What would you say to your critics and maybe a couple of the people who end up clicking onto this video and just thinking, oh, this is just a load of rubbish, I'm not going to listen to it?
Don't listen to me. Go through the archive, go through the intel. I mean, what I tell people is that this is my best assessment. If you don't like it, there's the door. Don't let it hit you in the ass as you leave. I'm fine with it. I mean, people can disagree. And I try to base what I am saying based on direct knowledge and experience. And it's my own, assessment, but I back it up by, now I put all this stuff on the internet, with the witness testimony and everything else. So I said, there it is. Now you can accept it or not accept it. Look, I have a family member who used to be the editor for a major paper, and in-law. And basically she said, look, you could put a dead alien on my desk and I wouldn't believe it. And I'd never cover it because we're a blue chip paper. And this is the stuff of rubbish for the National Enquirer. And I said, well, that's your bias. So you're not an objective reporter, or an objective finder of truth or fact finder. But literally that was said to me. You could literally put a dead extraterrestrial body on my desk. We'd never cover it. So, I mean, look, everyone has their biases, right? Scientists do, reporters do, religious figures do, every human does. What I try to do is do an assessment and a short interview or time like this together and say, here's what my assessment here are the facts. And now we have the archive online for anyone who can read, to see what it is. And people should reach their own conclusions, right? But I will warn one thing, and that is when you get online and look for this subject, the algorithms with all the search engines are going to push. They're going to push the false narrative, because these big tech companies are really love negativity and they love controversy. And so they're going to put, because that's clickbait. Facebook has had whistleblowers come forward and say, yeah, I mean, we do the algorithms because it increases ads, but there's also shadow banning, and there's also altering of content and banning content. My stuff gets pushed out all the time, and false narratives get pushed to the front of the algorithms all the time. So that's the other problem. And whether it's the book publishing world or Hollywood, there are these folks who make sure that the narrative that the powers that be want the public to hear is what gets out, because it's about brainwashing the public. I think it's all propaganda.
Yeah.
But the revolution in social media as well as the internet has actually greatly empowered that process. Everyone hoped it would have freed us, but because of the central control of these tech companies and their algorithms, and search algorithms, and shadow banning and all that, that's not the case. That's a fantasy right there. Now, it could have been that. It should be that. But I believe these big tech companies are integrated into the folks who want to control this narrative.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely some interviews I've tried to find of you which have not come up unless I've specifically written out the entire title of that video. Then it will come up. If not, then it's just I'll keep scrolling and it won't come up.
Yep.
But I don't know if you check the comments, but especially some of the big podcasts which you've been on, they've been overwhelmingly positive.
I don't have time. I have people who do that. We have a social media team, but I don't have access to my own social media accounts, and I never get on. Yeah, that was embarrassing to say this. I don't have time, and I don't have the patience, so I never see those things, honestly. I'm just, I'm very honest.
It's good though. The feedback that you're getting is good. So I think people are waking up.
Yeah, I think people are. Yeah, and I hear from like the people who are the hosts sometimes. Like I know Patrick David told me that they had great feedback, and Sean Ryan, the Navy SEAL, and some of the ones I hear back from them. They go, "Oh, this is," and it's good because that's one of the way we get the message out to the public. But like I said, I'll put out a little plug here at the end. We really need more whistleblowers and military and corporate people who are involved or have been involved, either currently or presently, in these programs to come forward. So anyone like that, you can go to our website, drstephengreer.com, and there's a box for witnesses and whistleblowers you can click, and I will handle that very confidentially. So I've just heard yesterday or day before yesterday that there's going to be another hearing in Congress in November, a couple weeks after the election. And so we're looking for more whistleblowers to come forward for that.
Good stuff. Well, just keep up the good work. It's amazing. And to be honest, it's been like one of my favorite podcasts. Like this is very interesting and relevant information. which
All
more
right. Well,
people need to know.
thanks for having me, and thanks for helping us get the word out.
No problem. Where can people find you? Your website and your social media?
Yeah, so it's drstephengreer.com is the website, and we will just send you can put the links to our social media, and the archive is dpiaarchive.com. And the DPIA is Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, so it's dpiaarchive.com, and there's a link for the crowdfunding. If people can support that, it's going to help us keep it alive and free for the public. We don't want it to ever have to have a paywall on it. So right now it's open source.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a good one.